the difference between SCP and CLI. We talk about the good things about use guardrails, sandbox, very important, and I love that question. We explore all these things. And then
I am ready to go.
Yeah, it's 11:23 on my end, so that goes till about 11:55.
Five before the hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I bring that NKBA story in if you're feeling like
Yeah, I actually I'd rather I don't the reason I don't want to one I don't want to draw too much attention towards it, right? Because I've processed it and moved on.
yeah.
So I find that if it's over, right? I know I think it's more just the fact that we get to a certain point in life that where yeah, we only have so much time and so much energy. We have to decide how much of it we want to spend and who with and how and allocate that time. But more importantly, I think I'm gonna speak my mind more. Not that I haven't before, but I think I'm gonna be a little bit more deliberate about it.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's much of a downside to that at this point.
I don't think there is at this point, and I appreciate what you're saying about that. At this point, meaning that at different stages you have to do that to comply. You have to do that in school. You have to do that, but at this stage, what in terms of a business context or it's a volunteer role, right? I mean, I'm not doing it for money. It's so you have to decide,
I think the
who
biggest
and what.
thing for you is knowing you as well as I do now is that, you're being associated with an institution that's not aligned with your values is very frustrating.
Yeah, I'd love the institution, but yes, to your point, I'm being associated to the group at the local level that is completely against who I am and what I believe in.
Yeah,
And
that's tough.
and that's yeah, we could talk about that. I guess if you wanted to. Yeah. So anyway,
That's
I'll
up
let
to
you
you.
go.
That's up to you.
Okay.
I'll begin by reading. I think I'll
Yeah.
jump right after sovereignty. Just start with self-sovereignty, and then
Yeah.
I like the notion of taking it in kind of hierarchical country all the way down to individual and all the things
Sure.
in between where we have examples from families to homes to teams to schools to whatever. So I'm going to start. Let me just pause real quick and then I'll start. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, co-host, and colleague Jim Gurule. And Jim brought us another cool topic that we had some fun with in the pregame, as we always do. The core topic is sovereignty, and as we always do, to tie it into our flywheel and the notion of self being in the center of our wheel, we're going to talk about a form of sovereignty that's we're going to call self-sovereignty. And before I read the definition, Jim, maybe I don't know if you want to bring any context into it or the impetus behind the topic or any of that stuff, but I'll throw it to you and give it
Yeah.
back to me when you're ready.
Sure. Like I said, I always appreciate the pregame discussions because it sets it up. But this was inspired by our framework, obviously, that we talk about every week. So for those of you not familiar with it, we use the Imperfect Men's Club. The imperfection is the perfection is our tagline, but it's based on this framework that Mark and I created a few years ago of these 5 areas of our life, no particular order. And I'll do the really fast version of this. But a lot of what we do, whether we're aware of it or not, or self-awareness as a man is our life's work. Could be our career. In this case, Mark and I have different projects, but yeah, our careers are our core identity. The other area is our relationship with others, and that could be our family. We have different relationship with men, women, our brothers, our sisters, our wives, our ex-wives, our all the different facets of that, and then our relationship with the world. So our worldview, which is very related to this. Like Mark will touch on that about the politics. Sovereignty is very related to a country, but also personally our relationship with our heritage, our religion. Other one is our relationship with ourselves, our mental health and our physical health, our well-being, something that's constantly going on, and our relationship with money, scarcity versus abundance. But yeah, Mark, this was inspired by as you know, I have involvement in my industry. I was asked to do a talk on Wednesday night. I thought it went real well. And I'll come back to that. But this is a group that I'm involved in. And you realize anytime you're part of a committee that you make decisions based on a vote, or a group of people make decisions on what's going to happen for an organization. And that's just part of being on a board of five to make a vote. But then I also realized that I was not in agreement with this group, and the physical toll that it took on me by the end of the week. It was a good week, but at the end of the week I was exhausted. My body physically just kind of shut down, and I realized, what's going on. And it was because a lot of these discussions were at the core of something I don't believe in, but I am part of this and had to participate in it. So anyway, let's break this down. And I'm always interested in your perspective about sovereignty and self-sovereignty.
Well, I think it's one of our favorite words is alignment. And I think that, we talk about being in alignment with your values. And one of the things I found fascinating about listening to you talk about this particular event and circumstance was that this manifested itself physically, like pain, like fatigue.
Yeah.
And it took you a sec to connect the dots, but it didn't take too long that this being out of alignment with my values and choosing to remain in that condition to avoid conflict, let's say, is it hurt, and I think that's the power of alignment and being in it or out of it. And I just think that's fascinating. And
yeah, and something I wanted to add, I need mentioned it about our framework. In the center of these five areas, we call it the wheel of life. The framework in the very center has self. So every episode is a self hyphen, but the first most important word is self-awareness, being self-aware. So, obviously what we talk about every week is something that I use. I have to think, what is going on here? So it starts with self-awareness. Really, instead of ignoring it or pushing it aside, I had to process the self-awareness. Why am I feeling like that? I had a good week. I felt good. I'm exhausted. It all starts with self-awareness. Yeah.
It's powerful. Yeah, let me read a brief definition of self-sovereignty. Self-sovereignty is the psychological and philosophical principle that you are the ultimate authority over your own life, mind, and choices. It really, Jim, is about the stuff we talk about. It's like you have choices when things get challenging. You can look inward, or you can look outward. And I think self-sovereignty proposes that looking inward is the true way to happiness, contentment, success, optimism, hopefulness, things like that. And looking outward, the opinions of other people, the rules that other people live by, the values that other people live by, that'll fuck you up, And I think we've all done it. I think we've all experienced both. But it goes back to one of your favorite phrases. I mean, when you make the choice, it's like, do I want to be bitter as a result of this experience, or do I want to try and get better and learn from it? And I say all the time, there's two kinds of people in the world, those that look to blame and those that look inside. And I think it's all the same kind of idea. One of the interesting things about when we were talking in the pregame was this idea that, well, we hear the phrase sovereign nation, right? So we are a sovereign nation. What does that mean? That means we take care of ourselves. That means we have our own set of rules. Right. It's the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the amendments. We have laws on the books that get enforced when you do bad things. Yep. We encourage certain behaviors and discourage other behaviors. And one of the things going on the global level right now, not to get too much into politics, is that the world wants a piece of us. The world wants to come in and bring their own rules with them and violate our rules to some extent. And it's caused a lot of the political discourse that's going on, the division that's going on in the country. Much of it is centered around this notion of, are we a sovereign nation or do we want to be a global nation? And you know how I feel about that. But I think if you take it and then break it back down all the way to the individual level, in between the individual level of self-sovereignty and the nation of sovereignty, all these things that exist in our lives, we have homes, we have families, we have communities, we have businesses, we have athletic teams and clubs and communities and boards that we sit on. And all of these things Like I ran my own company for a long time. They were my rules. If you wanted to work for me, you had to live by my rules. That doesn't mean I was right. It means they were my rules and it was my company, right? And some people might think that sounds arrogant. Some people might think that sounds controlling, but the rules are in place for a reason, so that so the whole thing doesn't just blow up and anarchy ensues. But if I know you've played on teams, you've been your own boss, you've worked for other people, you have a home, you have a family, you're a father, you're a husband. All of these are areas where we can have a sovereign existence, or we can have no rules at all. And I think that's fascinating, and I think both of us are inclined to lean into personal accountability, or and as opposed to being the analogy I see the passenger, we're the pilot. We're flying the plane. We're not looking out the window and just going along for the ride.
Yeah, no, again, I think this is super important because it applies to all parts of our life. But the context of our weekly podcast is um, self-sovereignty and how it affects. But really, what my conclusion was um, I had a conviction for what I believed in, but I was trying to appease the group because I felt that that's what I needed to do to agree or to become part of that. And with the fear of either the rejection or even the fear of being yeah, not being a good participant. And that's, I think that's okay to do that to a certain point, but if you have true conviction for something you believe and the same thing happens over and over again, I do think that's a conversation you have to have with yourself to decide whether and it could apply in all types of parts of your life, not just business. I think that's what a relationship is. It's a compromise, right? But at a certain point, if you're giving up your true belief system, then to your point, you're out of alignment, and you're not doing yourself any good or them any good. And we're at a point in our lives where we only have so much time and so much energy, so we have to be selective of the people we want to spend it with. And
That's the old saying, you are the sum of the five people you spend the most time
that's
with.
right.
So, and all of it, I can't keep from going back to the physical manifestation of fatigue and pain. It's so whether we want to appease a group or another human being or just
Mhm.
avoid confrontation, I think that's, having that discussion with yourself. Should I do this or should I blow this thing up right now? What's the upside? What's the downside?
Yep.
Just the fact that you were self enough aware to have that conversation with yourself. And I think that what I've seen over the last 6 months or so with regard to this particular circumstances, it just kind of took you that while to come to the conclusion that I'm done with the appeasement approach. I'm going to be more direct, and
Mhm.
maybe that'll change some things. Maybe it won't. But the downside,
Yeah.
as you've assessed it now, isn't that bad. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Someone's going to disagree with you, and maybe you'll fulfill your obligation to this group and move on to the next gig. So
Yeah, but the worst thing can happen is you're living a life that you're out of alignment with.
yeah, you're lying to yourself.
You're
Yeah,
lying to yourself, and
yeah,
you're even lying to them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, leaving something alone. And I say this in the context of the workforce all the time, and toxic bosses and toxic cultures is, if you allow behavior to continue without addressing it, you at some point you're condoning it, you're
Mhm.
encouraging it. And
You
so
are.
I'm intimately familiar with that internal dialogue, I got to tell you. And I think that, I say my dad's phrases all the time. If you're not being taken advantage of every once in a while, you're not being nice enough to people. And the balance between allowing yourself to be taken advantage of and just trying to be as kind as possible, it's an ongoing discussion. It's not a black and white thing all the time. But
Mhm.
what you've done is brought five what are referred to pillars of the sovereign mind. So maybe we can tick these off 1 through 5, and there's some redundancy here, but I think digging a little deeper is healthy. So the first pillar of a sovereign mind is radical autonomy versus codependency. That your internal state is not a hostage to the external conditions of the world or other people's opinions. And this
Mhm.
is, I think we all like to think that we can dismiss the opinions of other people, and sometimes we can, but sometimes it's difficult not to take those opinions personally. That's one of my life challenges is trying not to completely dismiss what other people say. I don't think that's healthy, but to take criticism from someone that we don't know or someone who is not accomplished even nearly as much as we have, that's just detrimental to your overall well-being, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, something as you know, I follow these Carl Jung uh, teachings, and one of them was this. I'll read it, a short version of it. But the ability to see clearly without needing to fix. See, often we think we have to fix it, and that we're going to participate and fix it. So it's really the capacity to feel deeply without uh, drawing yeah, without trying to have to feel like we have to go in and fix it or explain to everybody, convince them of our way of seeing it. You get to
Well,
a point that you accept it.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting, I think of that book that men are from Mars and women are from
Yeah.
Venus, or the other way around. And I learned this from my daughters, raising them on my own as their mother and father, at least in part, is this is maybe a man-woman thing, partially anyway,
Oh
but
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
It's
do you want
definitely.
do you want me to listen or do you want me to help?
Yeah.
And my experience, most of the time, they just want me to listen.
Yeah.
But my inclination is to want to fix and overcome and solve and I think that's a guy thing. Not that women don't
Well,
do that, but I
it's
think it's
also, I think we can both consider ourselves empathic. We're empaths, like we care. So, to feel deeply without drowning in the issue. Because, like
yeah,
you said, some say you
yeah,
did just want somebody to listen to. And but as a man, often, to your point, we feel like we need to go fix it.
yeah.
And that's not always what they want.
Yeah, no, it's often not what they want. I Number two is the integration of the whole self, and when what that means is that you can't be sovereign if you're at war with yourself,
Mhm.
And I think the self-sovereignty thing is, you know, I think that we all develop a set of values over the
Mhm.
course of our lives. They're probably it begins in childhood and we accept some of the values from our parents
Yep.
probably
It's
first.
conditioning, no question.
Just
Yep.
conditioning, environment, circumstances,
Yep.
where you go to school, all that stuff. And then you start to develop your own, which are, in my experience, just kind of polishing the apple over time based on what you've had success with and what has not served you well. And that's a learning experience. And some of that you just have to learn. You can watch other people make mistakes and not learn from them until you make your own mistake. That's been my experience. But
Mhm.
that if you have a really clear set of values, which is challenging, right? Because
Yeah.
things change, and you live your life and speak your words in alignment with those values, you're getting along with yourself pretty well. And your
Mhm.
experience that you described this past week, you moved out of that realm and you were out of alignment for a few hours and it it hurt, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a really good punctuation story about exactly what this number two here is. Just you can't be.
It's something else you made me think about it. It's not just that, but also as a collective group that gets pushed out to the world. And now I'm part of that. So that's not who I am, but yet that's what's being pushed out to the world. And I think that's what's bothering me more because it's not like it's just within when you're part of a group or you have a position in a group, then you speak from a collective group. And what is being pushed out is 100% not who I am or what I believe,
Yeah.
but that's part of being on a board, right? So
Well,
that's
the other side of that, it just dawned on me, is this: we have all this division going on in our country, and most of
yeah.
it's political, most of it's not really based on anything other than feelings. And
Mhm.
shame on all of us for letting that happen. But it's like just because you belong to a group doesn't mean that you automatically have all of the qualities or traits of that particular group. And I think we make that mistake
Mhm.
way too often. But that's the other side of that, as I see it. Just kind of popped into my head.
Yeah.
Um, the third one of the five parts is absolute accountability. And we talk a lot about this, and we talk about it in the context of personal accountability. I suppose it's part of what sovereignty is. And, it says here, the moment you blame an external force, whether it's the market, a partner, circumstances, or bad luck, you're handing over your power, you're handing over your sovereignty. And
Yeah.
in my experience, people come after your sovereignty all the time, for a variety of different reasons, and I think that the far left politically is interested in having control over everyone's sovereignty. And I think the farther you get to the right, as long as you don't go too far, you find more people interested in taking responsibility for their own actions and not being governed by other people necessarily, but abiding by the rules of the sovereign land. So it's an interesting phenomenon that we're in the middle of now.
Yeah, but it is. And again, it's two belief systems that have a collision, which creates division. And when you create division, then you don't have a sovereign, in this case, a country, right? You're divided. And that's we have history that doesn't always work out so well in the end when you get so divided that you can't agree on the most common core things that require to live in peace with one another and make progress.
I find it interesting that there are still people that will tell you that they're embarrassed about our country, yet they're not getting on planes and leaving. They're sticking around. So,
Yeah.
the fourth pillar of the sovereign mind talks about leadership, the sovereign leader. In a world full of noise, consensus-driven stagnation, and superficial metrics, a sovereign leader stands out because they don't seek permission to innovate. I think that's interesting. I think this seeking permission, if you're a kid, you probably want to seek the permission of your parents. If you're
Yep.
part of an organization and you're not the leader of the organization, you probably occasionally need to seek the permission of others. But this idea that I need permission to innovate, to ideate, to think about things, to observe and investigate, that's ridiculous. And I think that one of the things I see in corporate America, and I've seen it my whole career going inside and helping companies hire people, is innovation is rare. It's mostly reaction to momentum, and I see it all the time. And it's interesting that like a guy like Elon Musk, I think that's all he does is innovate. It's all he does is think about new shit all the time. And I don't know that that's necessarily sustainable for all of us, but I see way too many people inside big companies that have great ideas and they don't speak up about them because they're not encouraged to innovate. They're discouraged. And so I think sovereignty can be overdone, I suppose. The rule of law, we can be too restrictive, we can be too, authoritarian, I suppose. But I think that what we face here in this country right now is we came over here in the 1600s to get away from getting ruled under some guy's thumb, and we established a set of rules, and they work really well. And we have a contingent of people that are pushing back against those rules, that want to let other people from other countries with different rules and different cultures and different languages and different laws and different religions come in here and threaten our sovereignty. And I think that's something we need to continue to think of very, very seriously, because I think it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up something, I guess, a great case study, right? You could look at, let's just say, the NFL. It's a copycat league. Everybody knows it. Occasionally, somebody will come along and they'll innovate and change something, and the game changes. But in general, you'll find that corporations do the same thing. They copy one another because innovation is very difficult. In fact, that the talk that I did last Wednesday night was a large manufacturer, and they had hired me to do a consulting project, which was really the use case that I shared with the audience, and it was all about innovation. When they asked me to speak, I said, "Well, what's the event?" They said, "Well, we're doing this event." It was a large event, stage, food, all these different companies, and I asked, "What message do you want me to share?" And I gave them 5 different options. The market, trends, the economy, these different things, and then ultimately decided decided that we wanted to talk about innovation because that's my background. So the and like every talk you're going to do, you question what you're going to talk about. And I remember, like I mentioned, your voice in the back of my head about just tell your story. Because if you tell your story, um, stories are authentic, stories are true, but it sets things up about who you are and then what inspires us. But so I'll do again. I'll do a summary of it. So of course I shared my story about um, opened up this one with I said I have really no formal education. I'm autodidactic. Basically, um, everything I'm going to share with you tonight is based on what I've learned as a cabinet maker, as a um, salesman, as a kitchen designer, as all these different things. But ultimately, I create tools. I am an inventor, and I create tools for the industry. So what I'm going to share with you tonight really is, I'm honored that you've asked me to speak here, but I'm going to share with you really 35 years of knowledge that a company asked me to share with them in relationship to what's going on in the market right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. But also um, they wanted perspective. And even though I've done some consulting in the past, I didn't have this amazing technology called AI, where I would record the conversations and then have AI write the summaries and reports. And so I shared the whole case study about how exciting of a time we're in. I think this is probably the most exciting time to ever be alive because we have this technology called AI. And then I did share with them, yeah, I graduated with high school with a second, third grade reading and writing level because I was dyslexic and it was very difficult for me to learn how to um, read and write. But I did it through memory. And I said, but it turns out that same mind that made it difficult to read and write, it was also can see in concepts, can see in three dimensions, can see, I'm processing, like 1,200 images per minute. The average person is 400. So things are very simple to me to how things fit together, the concepts of that. And then even the language barrier, because the CEO of this company, he was Mandarin was his first language. So I would record all the sessions with AI, upload it into that. And I was sharing on the screen when I was speaking the infographics after each session, because I see things in images. So the infographics and all the conversations, there were 90 sessions, 5 sessions. I created these frameworks, and then I was showing the audience, this is amazing. I also could hit a button and it would do an output in Mandarin to do an audio summary of what we discussed in each of the sessions. It's just a remarkable time. But that was also when I got to the point where I said, um, yeah, it's just that I had in your mind, you think, okay, I have to do it this way because this is the way the industry does it. But now um, they've asked me to speak about innovation. That was ultimately what he wanted to talk about, innovation and how it affects the industry and how things go. So yeah, it's very related to what we're talking about, because you get to a point where you just have to, as you said, to be innovative, you have to be very confident in what you're doing is unique, and you're not trying. I wasn't trying to copy a PowerPoint presentation of that it would typically do on a talk. It was just really sharing an authentic story. And so anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in when you mentioned innovation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be alive. We did
Yeah,
talk a lot about AI before in the pregame as well. I like this last pillar. I'm going to read the whole thing.
yeah.
It's somewhat brief, but I just read it while you were talking and I liked it. So
Mhm.
it's the fifth pillar of a self-sovereign person is ultimately self-sovereignty isn't about isolation or ignoring the outside world. It's about building a psychological architecture so solid that you can engage with the world completely on your own terms
Mhm.
without losing yourself in the process.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
good
that. I
stuff.
love the phrase on your own terms.
Yeah,
And I think it goes back to your physical manifestation of fatigue. You were not living your life for that period of time on your own terms. You were acquiescing to the terms of other people. And God knows, dude, I've done that before. Because, sometimes, honestly, it makes more sense to avoid confrontation. Sometimes confrontation doesn't go away. In my experience, if left untethered or unattended to, it gets worse, you know? So, but in the moment, like at Thanksgiving dinner or in a conversation with your wife or a good friend that you haven't seen in a while, what's the confrontation's a waste of time, So
Yeah.
sometimes putting it off is okay. And most of what I see from the outside looking in on your particular circumstances, however long it took you, that's how long it was supposed to take you to come to the conclusion that you came. And you can beat yourself up over that, or you can just say, hey, it took 6 months because I am empathetic. I am a decent human being. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not trying to push anybody's buttons. But at some point, this is bullshit. I got to move on or whatever,
Yeah. No, again, it's on number three is right. It's absolute accountability. It's not to blame anything else, just to be completely accountable for who you are and what you think. And that's not easy. I think that's often after I do a talk, somebody will say, "Hey, we liked your story," and because it wasn't an easy path, but it was I had to be accountable. I had to deal with this. And so I could have taken that and, like a lot of people, use that as an excuse or self-medicated with drugs or the different things that often happens. Instead, you take full accountability. And I also think it's what's great about this country. And also I talk often about, I say country, capitalism is really what I'm referring to, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the market will pay for results in sports too. That's why I love sports, because if you're accountable and you can deliver a product or a service that has value to the market will tell you.
It's interesting that that we have these choices. Like we talk about, everything's a choice, and it's just like the choice of blaming other people or other circumstances, or taking control over your own destiny seems a fairly simple choice to me. But as soon as I say that, I think to myself, I've made that mistake before. I've certainly felt like I had the need to blame someone or something, or life is unfair or it's unjust. But that road never ends.
No.
Once you go start down that road, it can ruin you, because it might be, you know what, dude, it might be someone else's fault. It might be a circumstance. Life is often unfair, but so what,
That's
and I
right.
think if you get to this position of self-sovereignty, or continue to seek it out, maybe it's a journey, maybe it's not a destination, maybe it's constant, because we get challenged all the time as days go by. But the times that I've wallowed in injustice or blame or circumstances, I don't like staying there very long at all. It's a bad place to be. It's a dark place to be. And
You're like this. Then it speaks just to that. The moment you blame an external force, the market, a partner, timing, or bad luck, uh, for your current state, you hand over your power. A sovereign mindset immediately averts the problem, gives this, um, extracts the constraints, and like you said, that's now you can move forward with that. But it is a decision, and
everything is.
Yeah.
All right, dude.
All right.
Until next week.
It sounds good.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I think so.